Okay, friends, there we go. All set, I think. Okay, Doc South here. Want to mention this is another episode of the City Garden, a short story I wrote, a somewhat true tale of my life in the South when I lived there, and as a visiting Yankee. Yeah, yeah. The this one is actually the City Garden Part 4, but I'm going to label it Part 4B. Part 3, I somehow mistakenly called it Part 4, so that's going to stay as Part 4. Number 4 will be Part 4B. Make sense? No, I didn't think so. Well, best I can tell you. I can't figure out how to erase the darn thing, or edit it, so there's no sense spending 19 hours trying to figure that out. Better I should just try to explain. Okay. Anyway, the City Garden, Part 4. Huang met us at the door with two very tiny cups of tea. He was smiling as hard as he could as he offered us each a tiny cup. John said it was some kind of custom for guests to have a quick snort of tea before we enter our host's building. We kind of sniffed at it and threw caution to the wind as we gulped it down like it was a shot of booze. We were in a sewage treatment plant. Right. That done, we went inside. Huang showed us around a little and then excused himself for a second or two because he had to complete a test on a sample. He went to his lab table to prep some sludge. Once that step was done, he said how he had run out of his usual paper teacups. He felt pretty bad that he had forgotten to bring a few of his teacups from home. He smiled as he got a bunch of old wide-top beakers out of a top drawer from his lab cupboard. The stains on the beakers made John and I turn a bit green, but I got to admit it wasn't bad tea. John looked a bit woozy, but heck, Huang even brought cookies for us. So, the ones you dip in your coffee or tea. He was smiling so much. At least we knew that he had boiled the water, so, well, what the heck. Okay. And as we enjoyed tea and cookies and made with a bit of small talk, I gazed around the room. Huang had decorated it nicely. There was a photo of the ship he served on during the war. He did have some photos of his family hanging on the wall. I heard later from John that he took those photos home at night and brought them back every morning to hang them up again. They did look familiar. I'd seen the same pictures on Huang's mantle back home. It turned out that those 3 pictures were the only photos of his family that he had to his name. He kept dandelions near the photos and burned incense for them at home. He couldn't do that in the treatment plant, so here he surrounded the photos with these really large tulips he had found somewhere. Gosh, they were good-looking tulips. Big as they were, it seemed odd that they looked like lilies of the valley. Yeah. Speaking of huge, I couldn't help but notice that in one of the windowsills on the sunny side of the lab, there were gargantuan ripening tomatoes. You know how folks get the tomatoes when they're green and turn them red by letting them sit in the sunshine? It looked like Huang had somehow scored himself some really nice, huge Jersey tomatoes, and I guess he was letting them ripen a bit. I couldn't keep quiet. Huang, where'd you get those tomatoes? Gosh, look at those babies. Wow. They're gorgeous. My 2 hosts exchanged smiles. If they were closer to one another, they would have elbowed each other and winked. John chimed in as Huang sipped his tea. You mean those cherry tomatoes, Doc? Well, heck, we grow them here. I went over and hefted one. It had to weigh 10 pounds. Yeah, you two. There's something. This thing's like a bowling ball. Some cherry tomato you got here. Huang beamed happier than ever, and then hollered that he picks those cherry tomatoes out in the treatment plant garden. The cherry tomatoes were just now coming into season. He offered me to take one home. Boy, I said thank you for that. Wow. Hey, John mentioned that Huang had more work to do, and then went on to say that if I'd like to see the garden, he'd be glad to head out there with me for a visit. That sounded good to me. I told Huang I'd see him later back home. I also thanked him again for that great tomato as I hefted it onto my shoulder and headed out the door. We climbed back into John's carry-all cart and headed across the parking lot once again. This time we went off to the left and aimed for a truck-sized gate. A dump truck full of heaven knows what was coming out of the fenced-in area. We sure weren't going to win a shoving match with that darn thing, so we waited for the driver to pass on by. You know, whenever I see a truck go by, maybe you do this too, I always enjoy wondering what that truck is hauling. I've been that way since I was a kid. I figured the driver was hauling sludge, and so I was ready to hold my nose and managed to come out with some kind of crude remark or gesture, like, oh, yeah. and, and instead, I got to say, that truck that passed us by sure smelled great. I remarked to John how sweet that truck smelled, and said out loud how I expected to be gagging right about now, as a horrendous torrent of liquid waste came raining down upon us as it sloshed out of the truck when the driver swerved to dodge us. To tell the truth, that truck smelled really nice. Sort of like how girls smell when you pick them up for a date. I looked at John and said how sewage treatment plants have really come a long way. John wanted to know what I meant. That kind of surprised me. I asked John if that truck had just been in the sludge fields to pick up a load. John said that indeed it had just picked up a load, not necessarily sludge. I figured the truck was heading straight for us with a dripping old load of heaven knows what on its way out to some farm field out in the county. I figured some tobacco farmer needed a bit more nitrogen in his back 40. I was expecting to get knocked out by the stench. In fact, I felt a bit sorry for waving at the driver as I held my nose. That grizzled old trucker looked a bit hurt by my rude actions. Imagine my surprise when that big old dump truck went by me, smelling like it was loaded down with a few tons of rose petals. John looked my way. Oh, wait a minute, missed my spot here. Hold on a minute. Okay. Yeah, John looked my way as I dug a deeper hole for myself. John, I'm sorry as can be. I didn't realize that you guys here at the plant took such pains to clean up your sludge. I'm truly amazed. I'd have thought that guy was hauling roses. My chin bounced off my knees at what John said next. He said how that truck was indeed hauling roses. In fact, John had to clarify his first comment. Oh, you should have seen his big old smile as he dropped the bomb. Actually, Doc, if it's the rose I think it was, that trucker was hauling just one plant. One plant. Yeah. That said, John sat back and waited for me to for my brain to regain consciousness. It took a while, but I finally had enough air back in my lungs to speak. What do you mean one plant? That was a semi that passed us by. There was room in that bed for maybe 100 rose bushes, or maybe even more if you arranged them right. I felt myself getting bug-eyed. John was entering rebel heaven. Yep, he had a Yankee right where he wanted him. And now he went for blood, my cold Yankee blood. I'm here to tell you, Doc, John said. He went on to say, there was only one rose bush in the back of that dump truck. We don't let anything smaller than that out of this sludge yard. It just wouldn't be right. Let me park the cart and we'll go inside. No cameras now. We don't want to start a farm riot. That said, John rolled to a spot to park the cart and turned off the engine. Me, I was still sniffing the rose-scented air in disbelief. The parking lot smelled like a hot date.